All right, I'm so excited to sit down with both of you to talk about your new book, Energy Accounting. Can I get you both to introduce yourself? Maybe Maya, start with you.
Okay, sure. Um, I am Maja. I'm an autistic psychologist, author, speaker, educator, um, all that stuff. We do this introduction on our podcast all the time, and I can never do it. So that's what
We
it
do
is.
always struggle with the sort of the how do we start and how do we end?
Yeah. Okay, so Tony.
Oh yeah, I'm Tony Atwood, and what do I say? How do I describe myself? I don't know. I have been exploring autism since the middle of, well, almost the middle of the last century, actually, but for a long time, and I'm still excited by what I'm discovering.
And I'm Kara Dymond. I'm an autistic university lecturer and teacher and author. So, energy accounting. I'm wondering, Maya, if you could, in a nutshell, very, very briefly, tell us what it is, and we will get more specific as we go on and discuss the conceptual framework a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, yeah. So I always struggle with this, but
I
if
know.
I'm to sum it up very, very closely. It is a neurodiversity affirming stress management method, really focused on burnout recovery and burnout prevention. And it was designed, obviously, originally by me and developed further with Tony. But designed from an autistic and an ADHD perspective, and from a person who was at the time struggling with burnout and recovering from that, dealing with anxiety, depression, all those kinds of things. So, designed from that neurodivergent perspective for neurodivergent people, but not autism exclusive.
And I have to say, that's one of the things that really struck me as I read the book, even though it's not exclusively for autistic people. There were
Mhm.
so many, you know, concepts related to the neurodivergent experience that were represented in this book, whether it's alexithymia, delayed processing, stimming, residual overload. I loved
Mhm.
learning the word for that. Uh, but I'm wondering if, in what ways does having an intervention that was designed by an autistic person and someone else, and in some ways for autistic people,
Mhm.
how does that enrich the work and set it apart from other interventions? What do you think, Tony?
Well, I think, first of all, what energy accounting does is identify the stresses for the individual, but also a way of measuring it. And many of those stresses, when I've used energy accounting, I've been astounded at the power of the various stresses in that person's life. I'll give you an illustration. Talking to a teenage girl about the stresses that she faces at home. And one of the major ones was her mum being in a cranky mood. Now, her mum was usually cranky with her autistic brother. So it was nothing to do with her. She hadn't in any way upset her mum. But the mere fact that her mum was upset actually had a very profound effect on her. And for many who are sitting around when you're doing energy accounting, everybody's going, really? I have no idea it was so important in your life. So it's a wonderful way of validation.
Absolutely. That struck me as I read it too, because I'm an emotional sponge, but I'll have my own delayed processing of my own emotional reactions, but I'll take on everyone else's. So it was really nice to see a clinical intervention that approaches it from the outset with that understanding of what we go through. Now
Yeah,
this is
and
Mhm.
curiosity as well. I think
Yes.
it is the key here, that we're not telling autistic people, or anyone else for that matter, we're not telling people what their stresses are. We are providing examples of what they could be, but really approaching it with a curiosity and saying, let's go through everything in your life. Let's go through all of it and just examine what's what. And I think, for me, when I talk to other autistic people, and especially right now, there's a lot of discussion about it online, is that approaches that aren't designed by neurodivergent people tend to try to put their worldview over us
Mhm.
and try to make us fit into a box. And for me, having that um, more sort of curious approach, more humble approach in a clinical setting, and saying, your voice is actually the one that matters. We're not here to, tell you that your way of thinking is wrong, or that you have to be in this certain way. No, we want to figure out, what does a good life look like for you? How
Mm.
can we change the world to give you a place in it?
Yeah, I think another component is what energy accounting does. Is okay, what are the stresses in your life? But
Yeah.
then what do you do? In other words, what is the opposite of a stress? What gives you energy, infuses you, and so on? But it's up to the person themselves. They have control over what they do. It's not a psychologist saying, you must do this and this schedule, etc.
Yes.
It's up for the person to do that, and they can choose what to do. So they still have control in terms of alleviating what
Mhm.
is often unbearable stress.
Yes, and that was one of the facets that really came across was energy accounting is a dynamic, holistic, flexible, customizable approach. And I loved all of the examples that people can take and apply to their own life. Color coding on a calendar. It was so great to have color in the book. I'm
Oh,
wondering.
can I interrupt you
Yes,
there?
please.
When you said, "Oh, it's so lovely to have color in the book," Maya, in particular, and I were very keen for it to be color.
Yeah.
But Jacob, oh no, it's too expensive. Oh no, we can't. Oh no, we don't want color. Oh no, and we really were quite vehement in saying, no,
Yes.
there needs to be color. So thank you for Cara for confirming what we were telling them all along.
Yeah.
Yes, it really is effective. And I'm wondering, can you speak to sort of that level of personalization that is built into energy accounting? Either of you.
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I, I think I think it kind of just came about naturally,
Mhm.
because Tony and I both recognize that, and of course, Tony, you've been in the field for so much longer than I have. You were in the field for,
Yeah,
before
I
I was
mean,
even
yes.
diagnosed.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
yeah, but I think both of us approach um, our work and our lives really with the recognition that people just are different, and that we can't do a one size fits all
Mhm.
approach to anything. And I think this is the flaw that exists in um, many forms of therapy and
Yes.
many approaches to healing as well. Is that, okay? We're going to give you X number of sessions, and we're going to go through this specific program, and that's it. And that never worked for me. So when I kind of picked up, little bits and pieces of knowledge here and there, and I started combining them into energy accounting, and shared it with Tony, and we kept working on it. It kind of just naturally became a thing of, well, you use the bits and pieces that work,
Mhm.
and whatever doesn't work for that person, that doesn't work for that person, so we leave it. And sometimes something works for a period of time, but not another.
Mhm.
And all of that is just, that's life, isn't it?
Certainly is. Now,
Uh, but there's
Tony?
another dimension that I particularly like about energy accounting. Um, it doesn't come from a theoretical model. In other words, it's not an academic approach that has filtered down to be applied to the ordinary person.
Yeah.
No, it's actually come from autistic people themselves. And the structure has come up from autism and understanding autism and experiencing it. It's not a theoretical model, and you don't have to have a PhD in psychology to use it. One of the things that I really liked about it, the moment that Maya started talking about it, with the simplicity. And
Mhm.
I thought, yes, this is so simple yet so effective. It's one of those things you think somebody should have thought of this before.
Yes. Yes, there's something about it that it seems so obvious, but it is rather radical when you think
Mm,
about other interventions, especially the
mm,
focus on well-being and understanding even that you have sections that are on well-being symptoms. I find
mm,
as an autistic person, it's so easy to lose sight of those more positively experienced emotions, having a strong negativity bias, poor interoception potentially, that like happiness impermanence happens, and then having patterns to look for that are suggestive of what is well-being in one's life is a
mm.
really empowering framework. Um, what
That
do you
actually came from observing something that Tony did.
Yes, tell me
Yeah,
about
Tony,
that.
you inspire me. Did you know that?
well,
Yeah,
well,
so when I got to know Tony, he was he was then I Tony and I met for the first time in 2012, I think. And already back then,
mm,
yeah, we've known each other for a long time. Already back then, Tony was talking about um, kind of the strengths of autism.
Mhm,
And when he presented even then to someone that you've been diagnosed with autism, it was it was a positive experience. It was,
mhm,
yeah, there are challenges that come along with autism, but here's all the other bits of you that are also autistic, but that aren't deficits.
mhm,
And the clinical diagnostic language is so deficit focused, and so to have a professional who was focusing on the positive and the strengths and the qualities, um, the
mhm.
the awesomeness.
And how one can
That
make
that
sense of their
autism.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, but that really helped me to flip the script.
Mhm.
And so, I thought, why are we doing, you know, when we talk about stress, we're always talking about being stressed, being in burnout. And
Yes.
and the thing is, when we continue to focus on, and it's the same with anxiety and depression and so on and so on, when we keep focusing on the things that are wrong, we're actually training our brain to focus on what's not going well.
Mhm,
And so I thought, what if when we talk about stress, we also flip the script and we start talking about, wait, what are the signs that things might be getting better?
mhm,
What if we start training our brain to notice those things as well?
mhm.
And I don't know that it's become a thing for me that
it is. In a way, energy accounting could be perceived as primarily one of the stresses that you have in life. But I think the essence of its success is going through what you can do to enhance your life, the things that
Yes.
you can do more of. He's basically saying, reduce those sorts of things that are going to stress you out. But drawing, being with pets, solitude. There's a lovely
Mhm.
phrase for a child a little while ago who said, let the silence subdue me. And I thought that is such a profound statement. But it is you of needing silence at times and legitimizing that need. So it's also looking at what can you do that allows you to be the authentic self.
Yes. And I love that it validates how important those things are because I find, in general, for any human being, the more we have going on in life, the more stressed out we are. What are the things that we cut? We tend to cut,
Mhm.
the things that bring us pleasure, the things that we see as hobbies as opposed to responsibilities. And in
Yeah,
fact, we actually need those things to support the other.
we do, we do, and that's something that when I talk to parents, but also when I talk to schools and officials from municipalities, I have a lot of young clients that are still in school, and a lot of them, are experiencing school refusal and actually going through severe burnout, and they're always so shocked when I say, Well, they should stay home from school. They should actually be spending their energy on the things that bring them joy and the things that help them to recover. We shouldn't be so focused on how many hours that child can spend at school. That's not what's important. Um, and they're so stunned at it because it's, the world that we live in today is so focused on, how many hours can you be productive? How many hours can you spend producing something, contributing to society's structure?
Mhm.
Um, and the thing is, when you're in burnout, the only thing that's going to help you out of it is to bring those things back in your life that bring
Mhm.
you joy, that bring you energy, and that help to stabilize your nervous system. And those things, for certainly autistic people, tend to not be school as
Mhm.
it's structured in most cases, at
Mhm.
least. It's very few people that have access to a form of school in the way that universities used to be, with
Yes.
very self-directed learning. Um, that doesn't exist today, and I think that's actually the thing that ignites autistic brains
Mhm.
is
You're
that
following
self-directed.
curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's following our um, special interests.
Oh, I would call it. I'm increasingly reluctant to use the term special interest because I think
Yeah, I know.
it's not a good term. Passions is the
Passion.
one that I use. Pursue your passions. It gives you joy. It gives you
Yeah,
energy. Maybe a bit eccentric, but the
yeah,
British have always been eccentric anyway.
Yes, they have.
So it's being more British.
Yes,
yeah.
more British. Now, I want to back up a little bit because this has been in the works for such a long time. So, first of all, I'd love to hear where the idea started. And then I want to talk about how you two came to collaborate.
Oh boy.
Well,
Okay.
Maya, it's your baby. It was a 10-year gestation before the
Yeah,
birth of the book.
yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. So I I don't know when I really officially started developing energy accounting, because it came about fairly organically. So when I was in my late teens, I was so burnt out from school and from other experiences as well. Um, I was struggling with severe clinical depression, and um, the harsher end of that. Um, I did have, you know, daily suicidal ideation. I did self harm for a period, um, and I, I was at a point in life when no one thought there was any hope for me, um, including the municipality. um, and I was so lucky as to meet one of Tony's Danish colleagues, Kirsten Callison, and she was my psychologist, and she did help me out of the worst part of that. And kind of through her and some of her colleagues, that network that exists of professionals, I picked up a little bit here, a little bit there about stress vulnerability and, what are neurotransmitters
Mhm.
and, you know, bits and pieces here and there. And that kind of sat around in my brain for some time, I guess. And then I Kirsten told me, you should be a psychologist. and and so that was the day when I thought, okay, how am I going to go through school again? How am I going
Mm.
to survive that? Because that's the thing that contributed probably the most to my burnout.
Yes.
And I had to survive that, but I also knew that her saying that wasn't a joke. You know,
Mhm.
I knew that when she said that was a potential future for me. I knew that she was right. I felt it, you
Mhm.
know. It's one of the few times in my life that I don't want to compare it to a religious experience, because it's obviously not. It's just a social connection.
Mhm.
But I knew that I had to do it. So I knew I had to go through school, but I didn't know
Yes.
how I was going to survive it.
Yes.
Um, and so I started thinking, what can I do time wise to make sure that I don't drown?
Mhm.
And there was this one moment in time. I was living on my own. Um, I had my own little, 1-bedroom apartment, and working on my own budget, my own finances, and I have this very elaborate Excel spreadsheet, um, to keep track of my finances. And I remember looking at that, and I had very, very limited money to make things work, but I managed. And I even managed to save up money
Mhm.
in a period of time when I shouldn't have been able to. And I thought, why? Why can I manage my money so well, but I can't manage my own energy? And that moment kind of just, it flicked something on. And I thought, okay, I have to reframe it. I have to try to think of my energy as a resource that I can spend in different ways. I have an energy budget. Let's figure out how to make it work. I know that I have a limited battery, because that was the way that we used to talk about it, was that,
Mhm.
you have a battery, and autistic people's batteries are just smaller, or maybe they get drained faster and they don't recharge quite as quickly. And I thought, well, if that's the truth, how can I make that work? And that kind of started this several years long journey of trying to figure out how my battery worked.
Mhm.
And I don't know when I started calling it energy accounting, really, but somewhere in there that happened. Um, I'm often asked if I based it on spoon theory. So I do want to mention that real quick. I didn't actually know about spoon theory until years later. I hadn't heard of it. I'm terrible at getting news of what other people are doing, because
Yes.
I actually get burnt out very quickly from being on social media. So I don't spend time online in the way that you would think. um, but I did discover spoon theory years later, and I thought, well, that's kind of similar, actually. So I do want to make it clear that when we're talking about energy accounting, lots of people have their own versions of energy accounting. Lots of people come up with, you know, versions of this idea, and I think it's wonderful. And I think every version works for the people who come up with it. And I'm not saying that I don't want to say that my energy accounting is better. It's just that we've spent so long working on it,
It's okay, I'll get Tony to
testing
say
it.
it.
Well, well, Tony's a bit more professionally confident than I am, I think. But I'm a Dane. We're not supposed to say that we're good at anything.
Yes. Now, Tony, what was it? So, first of all, when did you first hear about this idea? And what was it about the idea that resonated with you?
Oh, I don't think Maya and I can think of a specific day or
No, I
whenever.
do actually. I know, actually, because I told you about
Oh,
it when I was in Australia back in 2014.
okay.
I,
So when is the
yeah.
anniversary of the discovery?
That so you would have heard about it in June or July 2014, because
Right.
that's when I was there.
So 10 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was one of those things that at the time Maya was doing quite a few YouTube videos.
Yeah.
And one of the themes of that was in terms of camouflaging and creating a mask, and how absolutely exhausting. And Maya used the wonderful phrase of being awarded an Oscar every day for your performance, but afterwards you have no energy left. That was a very dramatic visual metaphor as to what's occurring. And I thought that clarity of perception of the various problems, uh, you really know and have felt that. And the idea is so simple. I could see it immediately being an application. You don't have to have extensive training. You read the book, basically. You don't have to have a degree in any particular area. And it's written in conversational style rather than an academic style. Our intention is that people need to be able to pick it up, read it, and use it. But also, one of the things we're going to say is there's more, because on the web page, that is the energy accounting web page and the JKP web page, there's all the chapters and information that JKP said, no, the book's too big and you can't have it.
You can't have everything in there.
Oh,
Yeah. So there is more in that. But from my perspective, I picked up the idea and I thought, okay, and in fact, in this room, which is my clinic room, I'd have a big piece of paper and do 2 columns. This is using the metaphor and so on. And what I found when I was working with individuals, and especially their parents, it was not only illuminating for me, but for the parents too, who would, or a partner who would suddenly realize, wow, I didn't know that was so draining for you, or that was so energizing for you. And it was often looking at a piece of paper, not face to face. Too much of psychology is look at me
yeah.
and tell me about your feelings. But this was something that was actually eventually numerical, but is a way of assessing a number of components in that person's life that I found so appealing, so simple. And we've been writing the book together for so long, taking, well, you do this bit and I'll do this bit, and then send you a chapter. Oh, I think we can do this, or this bit needs to be. So it was a labor of love, really, over time, of realizing this needs to be out there. It's a discovery that is going to literally change lives, save lives, I think.
I mean, I think it already has.
Yes, I think so too.
I mean, Tony's been using this since we talked about it back in 2014. So really, this has been used clinically for 10 years. And we've both been teaching about energy accounting in our presentations for all that time as well. So there are professionals all around the world who have heard Tony or I speak, who know about energy accounting and who have been using it, and they contact us regularly to say this really works. And so that's really also been, because when you work on something for so long, sometimes you get stuck and you think, oh, do we really need to continue? But the feedback that we get from other people really kept us going back and saying, no, we do need to write this book. It does need to exist. And
But I would add to that too. Maya needs the credit, because if we'd have delayed, somebody else will pick it up and get the credit for it. And it really should be Maya that gets the credit for the whole of energy accounting. I've just facilitated that and encouraged it. But Maya is the originator and the person. I am sort of partially retiring, so Maya will now have a new career,
Yes.
passing on information on energy accounting and extending it.
I'm pretty sure it was 2014 in October. So a few months after you had heard about this idea, Tony, and you were presenting at the International Autism Symposium in Toronto.
Oh, the
Through the
Geneva
Geneva
Center.
Center. And you talked about energy accounting. I have it in my notes. And you talked about Maya. And I had seen Maya's videos. And so just putting the two together, I remember thinking, how wonderful it was that you as a professional we're collaborating with an autistic person and really letting something organically evolve from the autistic perspective. So you have been talking about this basically since Maya
Well,
told you
since
about
the
it.
moment I discovered the value of energy accounting, and I've been promoting this as a benefit. Now, I will add, as a broader clinician, energy accounting is also useful for those who suffer schizophrenia and the possibility of relapse, because stress will do that. It also for those who have alcohol and drug dependency, because again, stress leads them to use alcohol as their way of coping. So it's going to be something that we would use for people who are depressed for a
Mhm,
variety of reasons, often as a reaction to their environment. So it will also help those, for example, with eating disorders, because
mhm,
that can return if you're not careful.
mhm,
So any condition that, should we say, worsens under conditions of stress,
mhm.
then energy accounting is appropriate. It was the original theme came from autism, great,
Yes.
but it's certainly not exclusive for autism.
Yeah,
Mm.
so sort of as you've used it, you've seen broader applications and
Mm.
other people who could benefit. Now, what I love about this guide is it serves both people who have clinical practices, but it has like a self-help aspect. You can read it. There are activities to do if you are someone wanting to work on your own stress and well-being.
Mhm.
And um, like, why did you choose to write it that way so that it supports both clinicians and individuals? Such a unique approach.
We couldn't choose.
Yeah, look, we would say, hang on, this is the clinician's voice, or
Mhm.
no, 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 we need the guide, the friend advice. And
Mhm.
so various bits had to be rewritten because we would switch into a particular approach. And we
Mhm.
realized we need to be consistent. If we make it for a professional readership,
Mhm.
not many people are going to read it.
Mhm.
It needs to be a book that someone can use who's not seeing a psychologist or a psychiatrist
Mhm.
and may not want to,
Mhm.
but can then find it's useful in their life.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think when we started writing it, I think my initial thought was that it was for clinicians. And then it just became apparent very quickly that it needed um, that kind of self help book aspect to it. And I think actually, as time went on, it steered much more into this is a book that anyone should be able to read and
Mhm.
use. And yes, there are aspects that are perhaps more interesting if you're a professional, if you're a caregiver or a care professional or a clinician, you know, maybe, sure. But there's nothing there that's not useful, regardless of who you are. And I do want to mention that because there is, if you pick up the book, the last part of the book is the clinical implementation. And there's a clinical program outline there, which we were very careful to write it in a way that it's not it's not similar to things like CBT, where it's, this first and then this and then this. We did, of course, have to write things in an order, but we're very careful to say, restructure this in any way that makes sense. Um, and then we sent the book out to beta readers. And what we actually got back was that even those who weren't clinicians themselves said that the clinical outline at the end of the book is really useful. So even if you're not a clinician, do read that part. Even if you think it's not for you, read it anyway, because it might actually be the part of the book that ties it all together in a bow for you and um, really gets you started.
Yeah, I think many professionals need a conceptualization, and
Mhm.
it provides that conceptualization.
Mhm.
And the person reading it for their own benefit will often greatly appreciate those
Mhm.
descriptions that put it into a sort of a context. We don't hang it on a lot of psychological theories. It isn't a behaviorist or cognitive approach or psychoanalytical approach. The whole thing is actually based on common sense. I'm sorry, I
Yes.
know we're professional psychologists and so on, but it's basically common sense. And the
Yeah.
best ideas are common sense.
They certainly are. Now, what ideas, what concepts, I would love to hear from each of you. Which do you think are the most helpful? I know it's going to be really hard for Maya to pick, especially, so you can go second. Tony, what do you think are the most helpful concepts for someone picking up this book?
I think that it's exploring parts of you that other people have not explored.
Mm,
And your voice needs to be heard. So I would say that is one of the key features from my perspective.
Mm.
Maya?
Um, well, I think usually when Tony talks about energy accounting, the energy bank and putting it to that kind of deposits and withdrawals and the numerical values and having those estimates. And I do want to say that um, I find that even fairly young children, when you talk to them about the deposits and withdrawals, their estimates of how much something costs or gives tend to be fairly accurate.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, they're actually really good at expressing in relative terms how much energy goes into different things. Now, for me, um, I do really love the energy bank. And I think it's a really valuable thing to start with because it does give you that framework of what takes energy and what gives you energy. Um, but for me, what really made this work in my life was actually when I started to get into color coding.
Mhm.
And that's because to me, an energy deposit isn't just an energy deposit, and an energy withdrawal isn't just an energy withdrawal. So I often will talk about, your social energy account or your physical energy account,
Yeah.
um, because those ones are key aspects for me. Because what it all boils down to is that our nervous systems are so complex, and for an autistic person, doing something socially can be a major withdrawal in the moment. Right when it happens, it's a major withdrawal and we need to rest and recover afterwards.
Yes.
But if we don't spend that energy, we get lonely.
Mhm.
It might not be that we need to be very social. I think I talked about this on the podcast as well, is that some people might just need to have someone to chat with on Discord, and that's fine. They don't need more than that. That's their energy, um, their social energy being spent. And some autistic people are very, very social and need lots of social interactions. They might be very tactile as well and need hugs and closeness. So it's different what amount of energy you need to spend on being social. But if you don't spend it, you get lonely
Mhm.
and you run the risk of increasing your risk of depression, and actually prolonging burnout.
Mhm.
Um, so for me, talking about energy accounting in that broader perspective of what types of energy are you spending, and sometimes needing to spend energy in order to help our nervous system become more resilient over time. Um, that for me, it's much more complex, and it takes much more time to get that feeling of
Mhm.
how much you need to spend in certain areas. I call the social energy account our heating and water bill, our
Yeah.
electricity bill, because if you don't pay it, things get really cold and dark.
I love that.
That's a brilliant metaphor. I like that. Yeah.
And the physical energy account, I like to call it our insurance, because if we don't get the nourishment that we need, if we don't get the food that we need, if we don't get the sleep we need, if we don't get the exercise we need, our bodies become very receptive to injuries.
Mhm.
So that's our insurance. That's our health insurance.
Mhm.
Um, and and so for me, there's more color coding. There's the sensory account, there's the mental energy account, which I like to use for things like homework, but also for doing puzzles or
Yeah.
sudokus, or exercising our brains, and we need that as well. And having that framework for really talking about all of the different types of energy, um, and also being able to customize that
Yes.
to the individual. That's where things really start to make sense to me.
Mm.
Uh,
Yes.
that's my love.
Okay. And people need to read the book to explore that further
Yes,
They do
because,
yes,
because it goes so in
absolutely,
depth.
yes,
it
it is.
does.
It's very versatile. It's a way of exploring many aspects of life. And as we said, I think right at the beginning, it's really to do with the quality of life
Mhm.
for that individual
Yeah,
and
Mhm.
being aware of having to look after yourself at
Mhm.
times.
yeah.
And I have used this. I've used the preliminary basic concept of an energy bank account since I first heard about it with children in elementary school who are autistic, and they really have understood that concept. And I've loved, um, since I've been having conversations with Maya about this, and I was able to beta read the book too, then getting a bit more in depth in my coaching work. And I brought it into the graduate teacher training program, helping them to stave off burnout, which is a huge problem for teachers and anyone who, has jobs where compassion fatigue is a big thing. Bringing that concept, the color coding concept, and building into your schedule
Mm.
time to restore. But when I read about the domains of well-being, sort of those funds, where different sources that you want to be accounting for, it helped me so much personally too, to think about in a very tangible way, in a very externalized way, like actually look at my week and where am I getting those sources and am I getting enough? And
Yeah.
that's such a strength of the program.
Yeah, and a key component of the program is a diary in
Mhm.
which you color code the things that you do. Now, this is from knowledge of both autism and ADHD. You need an external prompt.
Mhm.
You need to see it, not think it. You need to open it. That's what you're going to do.
Mhm.
So it really is tuned in to the autism ADHD way of thinking.
Yeah. And can I add to that?
Of
Because
course.
obviously, when I started developing this, I wasn't a psychologist yet. That's that's actually fairly recent, my degree. But throughout university, I actually had someone that I met with every week to go through my calendar for the week, to go through what am I spending the hours on, where am I getting my sources of energy, and prioritizing my reading, for example. Um, because our curriculum, quite honestly, you wouldn't be able to read everything and still have a life. So having someone with me to help prioritize, what are you going to read closely? What are you going to skim? Um, how are you going to restore between these lessons? Things like that. Because if I didn't have someone to talk it through with,
Mhm.
and mind you, I've been doing this for myself. Like I had to teach this person how to do this with me,
Yes.
but I needed that external source, and I needed that conversation about it, because otherwise I wouldn't get it done. And
Mhm.
it's much more easy now that I'm able to structure my week now, because I am independent in my work. I'm able to structure my week however I like, make sure that I don't overload myself. But when you're in school, or if you have a job where you don't get to set those boundaries yourself, you may actually need to have someone to talk to, and it might just be a friend. It might just be that you both do energy accounting and you help each other with it.
Mhm.
Um, but it's having that conversation, because sometimes even autistic people, even though we like to do things for ourselves, we actually sometimes need to say things out loud in order to
Mhm.
process them differently.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we need to see things visually in order to process them differently. Um, our brains can't always, depending on how we work individually, do all the visualization and all the calculations itself. Sometimes we need that external, yeah,
Mhm.
One of the
rants.
things that I found, I have here on my desk, it's always here, a little notebook. And with this notebook, I have in it my personal energy accounting table. But what's interesting is I've been using this for 10 years is how the numerical value has changed
Mm.
over
Interesting.
time. It's a
Yeah.
part of an evolving process. So it's not as though you just do energy accounting. Once that's it, your life is going to be transformed. There
Mm-mm.
are new things that come in. Some things lose their power. Some things new come into your life that can be an advantage and stresses. So it needs constantly updating. So I
Mhm.
have my, shall we say, update every few months
I
as
love
to
that.
what I need
And
to do.
that's actually a part of the material that's the extra material that you can download from JKP's website,
Mhm.
is that we have an entire section on changes that happen with maturity as
Mhm.
well. So we have in the books sections on adjusting to sudden changes and systematic changes, but also changes throughout your life. Changes that come from hormonal changes, but also age, or just changes in your life, depending on, you become an adult, you change jobs, maybe you have children, your energy accounting changes because life is
Mhm.
dynamic. Life is not
Very
stagnant.
true. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, and there's another part of the book that I find is honestly crucial, which is when I talk to families especially, but really when I talk to anyone, is talking about interacting energy accounts.
Mhm.
So the way that our energy affects one another,
Mhm.
because people are affected by each other all the time.
Mhm.
And so the moods that other people are in, as the example that Tony mentioned early on in our conversation, you know, if mum is cranky, that's going to affect your energy.
Yes.
Or if you're cranky, or, if it, so this is one of the things that some autistic people might not like that I talk about this, because they might find it um, triggering or whatnot. But I actually often talk to parents about how they are affected by their child's meltdowns.
Mhm.
You know, um, obviously the child is affected in a major way, and it may take them days to recover from having a meltdown. But the parents are affected too. Um,
And
you know,
vice versa. Yeah, emotions are
yes,
contagious.
Yeah.
Yes.
emotions are contagious and actions are contagious. So anything that happens in an environment, whether it's home or school or work or wherever it is, it affects us and it affects others around us. So having that conversation about how energy, you know, is contagious, and in good and less good ways.
Mhm.
It's I think it's really important, because it's some of the things that we're not necessarily conscious of all the time, but it's
Mhm.
also one of the things that when you're in burnout, you don't have the capacity to even think about it.
Mhm.
And so it often comes around a little bit later, when you're starting to get out of burnout and you start to be able to feel the effect that you might have on others. Um,
Yes.
you start to have that capacity to talk about it. And at that point, it's really an important conversation to have.
Well, and
Mm.
even the idea of how our stress thresholds vary. This year, for instance, I moved into a new house. I had a flood. I'm still dealing with insurance. It's been 5 months, and my ability to cope with small stressors is not
Mhm.
nearly as, robust as it normally would be
Mhm.
because I have limited capacity with all of these other demands. And so
Yeah.
having that to explain to family members and loved ones, like why this person isn't maybe not coping as they have been able to at other times, I think is
Yeah.
another really powerful aspect of energy
Yeah,
accounting.
I think one of the things that we recognize more is how much change, even change for the good, just a mere transition, change is going to be energy draining.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So it really is it is a form of education for the person themselves and those who love and support them.
Mhm.
Yes. And then that permission that comes to take care of yourself now that you have this understanding of yourself.
Yeah.
Now, okay, we've talked a lot about sort of those short-term gains of using energy accounting. I'm
Mhm.
wondering what are some of the long-term gains that people who have used this program in your clinical practice, what do you see as the long-term benefits to changes in thinking and feeling from using energy accounting?
I think one of the things is greater resilience. We were talking about change that will occur. It's almost as though you've got energy in reserve. And one of the things that's written in the book is not just coping. You need some in reserve because
Mhm.
of anything that can occur. So I think that's one of the things that will occur long term is that you have an increased capacity and resilience to cope.
Mhm.
Mhm. Maya?
Yeah, and I think also just building that self-understanding over a longer period of time. Um, so when you have spent time, not necessarily, an hour every week or whatnot, but the more you know yourself, the more you know what your stresses are, and you know what recharges you, restores you, what gives you joy, um, and the more you know about how you work, the more you're able to adjust as time progresses, even to rather shocking changes. Um, and so when life suddenly does a U-haul on you, um, so that saying, the best laid plans of mice and men aft
Mhm.
gang agley. Um,
Yes.
it's you can do so much to try to prepare for life, but life is always going to surprise you. But when you know who you are and you know how you work, you know how to recover from those surprises.
Michelle, Michelle, sorry, there, Maya, that was very profound. You know how you work,
Mm.
and I think that's going to be crucial in many ways
Mhm.
for self understanding, but also the ability to explain yourself to other people
Yes.
and
Yeah.
for them to make accommodations. This is very neuro affirming.
Mm.
And once I think you understand the concept and the idea that I have to build in well-being, I have to make sure that this is a non-negotiable. I cannot be cutting this from my schedule. You've seen it laid out in front of you in your agenda. That pattern recognition kicks in and I think it can really change a person's whole approach globally
Mhm.
to one that seeks out well-being.
Yeah.
Now, I have two more questions for you.
Okay.
So, one, how on earth did you decide what was going to go into the supplementary materials online?
Maya,
You know, that wasn't actually all our choice.
Uh,
No. So the process with the publisher basically went like this. We submitted a manuscript after years and years of work. Tony and I met just about once a month online to talk about the book
yeah,
from the last 4 years or so, I think.
yeah, this was to review because each
Um,
of us would be working on sections, pass it
yeah,
to the other, who would then review and edit it and so on. Yeah.
yeah. And we did it very slowly because, well, first of all, we both also are quite busy, um, but also because you would write a section and then figure out, wait, no, that's not right. We need to redo it.
mhm,
Um, but then we end up submitting the manuscript, And the publisher is like, yeah, we did the calculation based on this number of words, but now you've got 25% more than that. So
My heart's racing just
problem.
thinking about it.
Yeah. And then we were like, yeah, but we need to print it in color. And they said, well, that's expensive. So now we really can't do it. And we actually ended up calling a meeting, Tony and I, and saying, we need to talk to our contacts. We need to talk to the marketing department. Everyone just bring in everybody for a meeting. And then we sat down and we explained to them how important this book is. And we promised JKP, Tony and I, that we would really work hard on marketing this book to up the sales.
There we go.
Because they were so worried that with the book becoming more expensive to print because of printing in color, that people wouldn't buy it. And so we had to convince them that it was worth it to do it.
It is. It's worth every
And we
penny.
really hope it was. And then they were like, okay, we can print in color, but we can only have, I think they said 256 printed pages, which still meant that we had to cut 25% of the book. And then they came back to us with sections marked for putting into the supplementary downloadable material.
Yeah, I remember. Yes.
Yeah. And some of the sections they had marked for supplementary material were actually the sections on burnout.
I'm so glad that wasn't cut.
And Tony and I came back to them and said, no,
this is absurd. Yes.
Yeah. So we had to negotiate with them about what to do in order to make room for certain sections in the book itself. And we still have, after all of that's been done, we still have, and I kid you not, 70 pages of supplementary material that is the additional downloadable material that's on the JKP site.
And for free, completely free.
Yeah, it's not extra. When you buy the book, you get that material. You can download it. And of course, Tony and I also have made handouts available from energyaccounting.com. So that's I run that site. And so the handouts for the book are available there. You can download them. They're not extra. They're just PDFs that you can download. And I will continue. I've said this before. I'm going to continue making handouts available as I create new ones.
Now, we could spend the next 15 minutes talking about the difficulties with the cover, but that's another story.
Yes, that's another story.
These behind the scenes details, eh?
Oh, yes. No, but here's the thing, though. We recognize that they're running a business. And so they have other calculations that they make on their end. For Tony and I, this is a matter of this book needs to exist. It needs to be out there. People need to have this available to them. And the way that we know how to do that is to put it in a book. We're not, I've already said it. I'm not good at social media. I'm not good at video editing. I'm not good at all of that. I can write a book and I can put it out there. And if it were up to me, this book would be very, very cheap. But we don't set the price. The publisher does. And we did need the publisher to help us with doing some of these things. So that's how it is. But the books ended up being £25 retail, I think.
Oh, is that the price? 25, as I was saying in England, 25 quid?
£25. And yes. I think it's $33 in American dollars.
And 45 Canadian.
45 Canadian. So, I mean, for me, if I compare this to going to a therapist and having one session with a therapist, this book is still...
It's like a quarter of a session.
It is. The book in many ways is priceless. You can't put a price on the value that it has, it will be an incredible investment.
Mm.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really transformative. I completely agree. And I've recommended it widely to many people.
Mm.
Um, so my last question, and it's a slightly different question for each of you.
Okay.
So for Tony, I want to hear how energy accounting has personally helped you. You shared already that you do your own version. And then Maya, when I get to you, I'll prime you with the question now.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
How might it have helped you earlier in life had this already been a concept? So, in your earlier life, childhood, and adolescence. So, Tony, how has energy accounting helped you?
Okay. It, what happens if you're drained of energy? It makes you despondent and negative and potentially quite depressed. But it allows me to actually see something tangibly on a piece of paper. So not a mental process that's going through my mind. I'm actually doing it in a mathematical sense, an accountancy. I have my list, I have my numbers, and I can look at balancing my life as you balancing your bank account. That's what's happened is I've been able to balance my life. New things have come in, physical exercise, going to the gym, and things like that that have been helpful. There are also things of the past, people who have gone,
Mm.
but I can then spend time thinking of them and having a mental conversation with them to re-energize me. So it's being creative as well in looking at the ways that you can be re-energized. And for me, in my particular stage of life, it's looking and seeing the next generations coming through. Maya. It's lovely to see Maya being so successful. And that's
Yes.
my goal. I have no more mountains to climb. I've climbed them all. That's it. But what I want is other people to be successful. So that's been a new energizer for me, is seeing various people that I can support and for them to flourish. That's been very valuable. That's uh, shall we say, a great component of energy accounting. Yeah.
I love that. Oh, I'm getting a little misty eyed.
Thank you.
Now, Maya, how might energy accounting have helped you in your earlier
Oh gosh.
manifestations?
Well, I mean, it kind of so that there's aspects to that, of course, because certain parts of life you just can't change. But I think if I had had teachers around me who knew about energy accounting, or if my parents had known about energy accounting when I was a child, I think perhaps they would have seen um, some of the ways that I reacted to certain things in a different light. I think there would have been more understanding of what was going on with me at a very early age. Even if we hadn't directly talked about autism, even if we hadn't talked diagnosis, I think just seeing things in terms of, oh, wait, this actually stresses you out rather than this is something you just don't want to do, or are you being lazy, or stop fretting,
Mhm.
you know um, seeing things in that different light. um, and I think if even if I'd known about it at, say, age 12, um, when we were going through a move from a very small town to the center of Copenhagen in Denmark, which is our capital city. And we moved from a town of 500 people to really the center of the capital when I was 12 years old. And I think at a moment in time like that in my life, having had energy accounting, I think would have helped to build some self understanding of what was going on, why this was stressful for me, and why I suffered in school at the time. I changed to a school that was actually a lovely place, but I still I still couldn't go. You know, I've told this to you, Kara, before, but throughout all of my school years, all of my life, I have been I've had an absentee percentage from school of between 20 and 50. Um, and and I think knowing myself, why that was one of the things that helped me through high school and university, because it helped me to see, you know, why is it that I'm drained of energy and I can't go to school Thursday, Friday? Well, if we flip it around and we say, why don't I stay home on Wednesday? Or why don't I skip that particular class because it's so stressful for me? Obviously, you still have to watch each class independently, but having that way of thinking about it, of saying, I'm going to preemptively skip school so that I don't burn out.
Mhm.
I think having that way of thinking would have helped me so much early on in my school, and might have not made school, an allergy for me that I couldn't do it. I think that would have helped tremendously, and especially if my teachers had also known,
Mhm.
because having teachers that you can go to and talk to and say, this is actually really stressful for me, or this part of this class is something that I can't do. Understanding that group work was the thing that drained, 50% of my energy at school.
Yes.
Or sitting next to that kid that kept teasing me about my special interest. You know, things like that, of just knowing, where do I need to be in the room? How do I need to have questions posed to me? Or can I do group work by myself? Can I just, you know what? I can do 5 people's work. It's fine. Just let me do it on my own. And everybody else can have a team of 5 people to work with, you know. Um, that, knowing things like that about yourself, I think can contribute to preventing burnout,
Mhm.
rather than, I always talk about that, actually, of instead of doing burnout recovery, after things have already gone wrong, what if we work preemptively?
Mhm.
What if we prevent autistic children from burning out? What if we prevent all of that additional anxiety and depression and eating disorders that actually come from long-term stress? In many
Mhm.
cases, you might be sensitive to it, but there are so many cases where it doesn't necessarily develop until you're in that environment that stresses you out so much.
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe Tony, you can say
Well,
something about that.
I have particular thoughts. We are going to create enemies,
Oh
and the
yes.
enemies will be in the psychopharmacology industry, because what we're suggesting is an alternative to medication to make someone tolerate a toxic environment and lifestyle. So that they will hate this.
Yeah. When you say that, Tony, I do want to add that in the book we actually also do talk about this very briefly, and we don't suggest that if you're already on medication that you should drop your medication in favor of energy accounting. That's not how this works. If you are going through clinical depression, anxiety, whatever, um, stick with your medication and work on your well-being, and talk to the mental health professionals in your life regarding lowering dosages. Be very, very aware of how you manage that. We are not advocating that someone who's on sertraline
Oh,
or
yes,
whatnot, that
absolutely.
they just
Yeah.
skip their dosages and drop it completely.
Mm.
It's very, very important not to mess with your brain chemistry in that way. be very conscious of changes to your medication. But what we are suggesting is that if you're vulnerable to going into burnout and you start that preventative process, maybe you won't end up needing it in the first place.
Yes. Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I endorse your clarification. Yes.
I can also see for myself, uh, had I earlier, especially those sort of critical tween to teen years when I was developing masking and people pleasing as coping mechanisms, at that time, if I had known more about this and been able to truly embrace and unabashedly embrace autistic joy and stimming and all of those things that nurture oneself, I think it would have made those years so much easier. So energy accounting, I think, can unlock those things and give us permission to really connect with those parts of ourselves that sometimes get crushed out of us, but are
Mm,
so important to our well-being.
yeah.
So,
You know, um, we've talked about masking and stimming before, um, and the fact that I had to relearn how to stim in
mhm,
my 30s,
yeah,
and I don't know when it got crushed out of me,
mhm.
the stimming, but I know now that it's natural to me to do.
The
It's
self-regulatory
absolutely,
benefits, yeah.
it's absolutely a natural thing for me. But I didn't do it, and I didn't use it as a regulatory tool
Mhm.
for so many years of my life. And I had to relearn how to do it. And I think in some ways, one of the things that we're advocating, Tony and I, with energy accounting, is embracing your authentic self.
Mhm.
Of course, with the caveat that um, our freedom ends where we start hurting other people. There's always a line that we don't cross, but you know, we want a world in which you can stim publicly and no one's gonna
Bat
judge
an
you.
eye. Mhm.
We want that. We want a world where you can go to school and you can go to your teacher and say, I'm really dysregulated today. I need to go sit in the quiet room for an hour. And they will say, okay, yeah, you go, sit down. Bring your noise canceling headphones, listen to an audiobook, do whatever you need to do. It's fine that you're not here for this session, this lesson. It's we want that world. And I think in many ways, when I talk to people of my parents' generation, um, the world they talk about where someone wasn't depressed, they were just melancholy or, whatnot. I I understand in a way what they mean in that you were allowed to be different in other ways than you're allowed to be different now.
Mhm.
I think there are so many boxes, social boxes that have been created over the last 10, 20 years that really don't need to exist.
Mhm.
No. They confine people.
Yeah.
Yes. As we get more rigid about what is normal, we then are looking at what is abnormal and
Mhm.
pathologizing things that are natural ways of
Yeah.
existing in the world.
Yeah. But even within neurodivergent communities,
Mhm.
having that conversation of you don't need to be autistic in a particular way. You don't
Mhm.
need to be ADHD in a particular way. You
Mhm.
don't need to be always a particular way to be a part of a community. You're
Mhm.
allowed to be whoever you are. And I think having that freedom to be authentic is such a key aspect to achieving well-being, um, especially in a social setting. And whether that is the freedom to not have eye contact or to have eye contact just on the days where you have the energy to do it, um, you know, little things like that really do
Yes.
matter. And yeah, I
So
think that's
we're encouraging a paradigm shift
yeah,
Mhm.
for the various generations of acceptance that there is a reason that somebody does that and it benefits them, and we move on. It's not something to actually sort of make a negative comment about.
Exactly.
mm,
Well, thank you both for, planting seeds for a kinder, more comfortable world for everyone. And thank you for being here. And we're in 3 different time zones right now, so I'm really
we are,
grateful
we
to you
are.
both.
We actually talked before we started recording. We talked about a few things, and we did consider mentioning the time zones because it's early morning for me. We started recording at about 8:30 my time. For Tony, it's late
It is
afternoon.
early evening,
Yeah,
but Cara, you are the champion here because you are there at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
in
It was
Canada.
2:30 when we started in the morning
yeah.
on Christmas Eve, so it's going to be a busy day, but
It's going to be a really busy day.
uh,
Yeah.
but I'm so glad. I really loved this conversation, and I obviously love your work, and I think it's going to be a paradigm shift and make a huge difference for many people's lives.
We hope so.
Thank you. That's what we wanted.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
thank you so much for taking the time to be here, Kara, and
Of
for having
course.
this conversation with us. It's
Thank you.
really a lovely. It's always lovely to talk to you, but for you to get up in
Likewise.
the middle of the night to do this,
Very happy to.
thank